Hey friend, Chris Van Diver here from WhyLogicProRules.com, the website that helps you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro 10. Today, in day 3 of our 5-day walkthrough of the big features of 10.5, we're going to dig into the sampler, which is the rebranded, reskinned version of the EXS24. We have a much more easy on the eyes sampler, which gives us still that depth, that ability to create multi-layered sampled instruments with even more flexibility. And the best part is even though we don't have an EXS24 living in a legacy folder that you can go back and refer to, the sampler is completely backwards compatible with all of your old Logic projects. It will just replace the EXS24, but all of your instruments, all your samples should load up, no problem. Now, real quick, just 50,000 foot view, we have 2 different samplers now. Quick Sampler allows us to impact one sample at a time in a very quick and easy way, drag and drop, be able to adjust the waveform with a graphical display, while the sampler allows us to load many samples at a time and be able to spread those samples out across the keys of a keyboard. We have a graphical display that we can even use as well to adjust the waveforms of each individual sample. And there's just been a little rearranging housekeeping of the instrument in terms of where things are. So real quick, we have 5 different modules within the sampler. We have a synth section, which allows us to adjust the pitch, add filters, either in series or parallel to each other. And we have an amp section to adjust the volume and pan. We have the mod matrix, which allows us to connect different parameters to other parameters to modulate those targets. And you can set up to 20 source and target relationships within the mod matrix. From there, we have the modulators, which allows us 5 envelopes and 4 LFOs. And in both the mod matrix and modulators, you can just press this plus button or minus button to introduce a new lane. And also you can create an envelope or an LFO within the modulators just by clicking on these buttons here. After that, we have the mapping, which shows our different samples laid out as zones across the keyboard, which we can move around. We can adjust the velocity, the range, etc. And we also have the zone module that allows us, just like the quick sampler, to affect and adjust the samples in a graphical waveform display. And we can show and hide each individual module, just by clicking on the dot within the tab, or clicking on a tab to reintroduce, or you can hold Option and click a tab to see only that module within the sampler. And even better, we have a new way to be able to adjust the size of the instrument itself, not just the right-hand corner, but also the bottom of the instrument as well to see more of the instrument. And for those of us who are wondering where the options menu is that was in the EXS, all you have to do is head up to Logic Pro 10, Preferences, Audio, and we now have a sampler tab, which shows us the miscellaneous and virtual memory options. Now, this is not going to be a deep dive in every single element of the sampler. We would be here all day, but just a quick overview for those of us who are not that familiar with the sampler or EXS. The EXS houses multiple samples if you want it to. It can even house multiple groups of samples across the keyboard. We're given a synth section to be able to affect the pitch and the tonality of the instrument itself. And the part that I think can be a little intimidating to beginners is the mod matrix and modulators. Modulation doesn't have to be a really intimidating thing though. In fact, let's just load a factory preset here. And I'm going to load up the tremolo plugin in the modulation plugin. So we already have a variety of modulation tools at our disposal already. But just taking a look at the tremolo plugin, what this does is it modulates the signal from left to right because we have a stereo instrument. So if I play a note with our piano sound here, on a quarter note rate, it's going to modulate the sound from left to right. And we can have different shapes of modulation. So let me turn the smoothing all the way down. Now it's a square waveform. So if I press a key, it's going to modulate left and right in a very on-off fashion without any sort of transitioning between left and right. And beyond that, we have chorus and flangers and all sorts of ways to modulate as well. But just keep the tremolo in mind as we move forward here. With the modulators and the mod matrix, we're able to create an envelope or an LFO to impact another parameter. And it doesn't just have to be envelopes and LFOs. It's just, for now, it's easy for the conversation. So now I've created LFO 2. And I'm going to set the shape of the LFO to square. And I'm going to drive up the rate, not too fast, maybe right about there. And if we head into the mod matrix here, we can create a new connection or pathway for this LFO2 to impact another parameter within the instrument. So if we create a new mod matrix pathway here, I'll select LFO2, and then I'll say I want LFO2 to modulate another parameter, and I'll pick the pitch. Now, if I take this amount slider and drive it up or down, you can see that there's this red half ring around the pitch knob, which means if I press a key on my musical typing, this instrument is now going to go back and forth 12 semitones in both directions. And that's where the fun begins, because we can have just about anything in the sampler impact something else and modulate it within the instrument. Now, the bulk of this video is going to be focused on loading samples and getting them squared away within the sampler. But perhaps in the future, I'll create a series on synths and modulation and how to route these things together. So if we take a look just at the mapping section here, I'm going to load that up in the zone so we can see both views, and we'll just kind of bring this down here. Each instrument is made up of a series of samples. And for this piano sound, we have both high and low samples, and they're grouped together. So if I click on the high here, we can see that we have some high samples on the higher end of the keyboard and lower samples in the lower end of the keyboard. Each sample, when it's placed onto a key on the keyboard here, is assigned to what we call a zone. And a series of zones can be made up into a group. Just like how you can group different channel strips within the mixer into a group, like the drum group, the guitar group, the vocal group, we can have different groups of samples. Now we can zoom in on the keyboard here to get a better view of what's going on here. And we can also preview different samples. And we have 3 different views for viewing our different groups and samples and zones. So we have the key assignment window here that we can zoom in and out. We also have the group table that shows us our different groups and other parameters related to the groups. And we also have the zone table that shows us the different zones and the different available parameters for each of the zones. And remember, zones are samples. So let's go back to the key assignment view. We're going to stick to the key assignment view in the zone module here, just to make things a little easier. We can also show or hide the group section on the left-hand side. We can rename groups, which we'll do with some sampled instruments that I'll drag in. And we can even mute or solo an entire group. Within the key assignment window here, we can click on a note to pick a zone, or we can select a zone itself, and we can drag up and down to adjust the velocity range for that particular zone. We can also adjust the range at which this zone is played across the keys by holding our mouse on the left and right hand borders and dragging it across. And we can even select multiple zones by holding Shift and clicking the various zones. Now, taking a quick look at the zone editor, it looks just like the quick sampler waveform editor as well. We can adjust the start and end time of a sample using the markers. We can snap to zero crossing, transient, or beat. We can preview a sample. We can adjust the loop as well. If we kind of zoom out here, we have a loop here. We can play it as a one-shot or reverse the sample. And we can even follow the tempo of our project. For a deeper look into those sort of functions, I highly suggest checking out the quick sampler video. And what's super cool is that we can actually hold Control and Option to zoom in on the waveform, just like how you would zoom in and out of the different regions in the tracks area, which is super handy. Now let's dig into how to load samples into the sampler. I'm going to actually recall the default instrument, and we're going to drag and drop some samples into the sampler to examine. Now we can either drag into the mapping section here or the zone section. So let me pull up the Finder here. And let's drag in some drum samples here. I'm going to drag everything in from this folder, drop it into the zone section here. The sampler analyzes the different samples, and now we have our samples spread out across the keys starting at C1. And it's named this group of samples or zones as drag and drop. And it's mapped these different notes chromatically across the keys. So we can play them with our musical typing here. Let's bring down the scale here. Now let's try a different approach with this instrument. I'm actually going to create a new mapping here and drag these into the mapping section. Now you can see here, I can actually lay these out on specific notes. I can actually pick the root note for where I'd like the samples to be placed. So I have C0 here, and if I drag up here, I can actually set the range for which these notes are played. So drag it way down. There we go. So now we're placed across some of the white keys and some of the black keys here. One other thing to point out is the pitch button here will determine if a particular sample will be pitched up and down the keys. So let's actually remove a lot of these samples here. And I'll drag this up to C1. I'll drag the range like so. So we'll play this right up and down the keys, but without the pitch turned on. It's the same pitch up and down the keys. Now let's move into more advanced ways to drag and drop into the sampler. So once again, I'll go up to the gear, create a new mapping. Now I'm going to bring in the same drum files here. I'm going to drag them into the mapping section, but we're going to drag it right above the mapping. And you can see we have two different options here for drag and drop. We have chromatic and we have optimized, almost exactly like the quick sampler. So chromatic maps the keys chromatically from C2, uses the original looping, length, tuning, and loudness, where optimized maps the keys based on analyzed pitch. It crops any silence, searches for loop points, and optimizes tuning and loudness. So let's start with chromatic. And then we have two options, zone per file or split at silence. So let's pick zone per file. So once again, we have our drag and drop group here. In this case, we were placed in C1 instead of C2, but each key starting from C1 going up is a zone of our samples. And it's the exact samples, nothing has been adjusted. Now let's kind of back out of this and let's open the Finder. And let's pick one of these samples that maybe has some silences in between. So I'll see if we have a clap here. Perfect. So let's drag the clap in, drag it up, which means that the sampler is going to identify any silence in between the samples in this one audio file, and it's going to split up the file across the keys. Which you can see we have 4 different samples now laid across the keys, excluding the silence in between. Perfect. Okay, let's now try some of the other options in the optimize section. Now behind the scenes, did a little studio trickery here, and I've actually created a series of samples using the electric piano. Now I'm just going to drag in one sample to start with. I'll drag in this key sample, go into the optimize section here, and for zones per file, what's going to happen when I let go is we're going to create a new group that analyzes for pitch and then adds loops as needed. So check it out. We have our new group, and the sampler has correctly identified that the root key is D sharp. I picked D sharp and then just created 4 different layers of D sharp of varying velocities. It's added a loop as necessary so we can actually play this instrument. But the velocity is very quiet, so we're not hearing it very well. Okay, let's now dig into the other optimized section here. I'm going to select all 4 keys, drag them in, go up to the top. We're going to set zone per note, which means that there's going to be a new group created for each note or each audio file. And this is especially great for samples that have different velocities. Check it out. So we can play each one for the different velocities. At this point, all we have to be concerned with is how to save this instrument. Now, for most projects, you probably just want to save a sampler instrument for that project. So all we have to be concerned with is going up to File, Save or Save As. We can save this project. And we just want to make sure to enable the sampler audio data when we're saving our project. And we hit Save. But in the case that you want to save this as part of a library of instruments, in that case, you'll want to go to the Plugin Preset menu here and go down to Save As. You just want to make sure to save with audio data, which means that this instrument will be saved with the samples itself. The samples will become part of your library of instruments. So let's just create an instrument, Chris's electric piano, and let's save. And if we close the instrument and go to the library here, so let's close this down, open the library, we can look for Chris's piano instrument. Let's just make sure to highlight the sampler here. And you can see it's right there in the library to be able to pick from, or within the plugin preset menu as well. Drop down, Chris's electric piano. Just like the quick sampler video, if you want to create an organized sampler instrument selection, then you can go to Save As. And within this menu here, you want to just create a new folder, and then you can create electric piano, and then save right within that. Just make sure to save with audio data. And if you want to be able to search for a particular instrument that you've created or just a factory instrument in general, go to the preset menu here, go down to search filter, type in Chris, and there we have it. So I hope this has been helpful for you. As always, if it has, I highly suggest subscribing to the YouTube channel, Why Logic Pro Rules, or subscribing on the website itself, whylogicprorules.com. Every week I'm posting new videos, new emails, and new posts to help you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro 10. Thanks so much.